Hi guys, JP from FSiPanel. If you are just coming from the previous VOR approach video, welcome back on board. If you are joining us, this is how to fly RNP approach using FSiPanel, and for that we are going to use Bremen Airport, runway 27, as you can see now on your screen. We will try to set a RNP approach runway 27 from overhead Rogbo, 3,000 feet, and then we will start the approach and fly that approach. So I got some post on my forum asking, can we fly RNP approach using FSiPanel? Yes, of course you can, but you need to set it up manually or via a star. Then you can fly anything you like. So on that video, I will show you how to do that. So first of all, what I do personally every time I start the 737, as you can see, I have the default figure. I will just set my training weight. So a good training weight is to have fuel between 4,000 to 5,000 kilograms. That's good enough to do go-arounds and to play around. And the payload is up to you. Just make sure you are below max landing weight unless you want to train overweight landing. So here I will use 56 tons of zero fuel weight. So my aircraft is at 61. All right, you can do that from within FSiPanel. If the aircraft is overweight, you will get a dialog asking you to change the weight, and you can do it from the program itself. All right, so let's program that approach. So what we need to do on that RNP is to program a pilot waypoint. We are going to program this point Rogbo, and we will put ourselves, let's say 6 miles east of Rogbo on the heading 266. So we are flying a straight line for the approach. All right, so let's do that together. Let's start FSiPanel. Here we go. FSiPanel has started, detected Bremen, runway 27. It's a 737-800. So the first thing to do is to create a pilot waypoint. If you're lucky, if you go in the star and you look in the star, you might find your point. Right there, we don't see the point Rogbo that we need, so we will need to create ourselves that waypoint. Not a big deal, and I'm using that opportunity to show you how to do that. So if you go to Select Fix, you have the Pilot Custom Waypoints. So we are going to click on Select Waypoint. Now I need to create a new waypoint, and now this is where you have to follow with me carefully. All right, so we need to pick a nav aid or the actual aircraft position. For us, it's a nav aid, and the name of the nav aid, as you can see, is Rogbo, Romeo, Oscar, Golf, Bravo, Oscar. So I will type in Rogbo and search. Now you make sure that the distance there is what you expect, because you might have several points called Rogbo. That's more true with VOR NDB, so make sure you pick up the right one. So I'll pick up that Rogbo and I will select that waypoint. So that's done. So now FSiPanel has Rogbo as the reference. From that reference, FSiPanel is asking you what is the radial and the distance from Rogbo where you want to be positioned. So let me show you again the chart. So as you can see, Rogbo right there, we want to be positioned on the radial 086, which is the opposite of 266, right? So 086, so, and the distance, let's put 8 miles. Okay, so let's do that together. So we said the radial is the opposite, so that's 086. And I would like to be 8 miles out. Now you need to press on compute coordinates. So now that coordinates corresponds to 8 miles east of Rogbo. And now FSiPanel wants to know at which altitude you want to be. So if we look on the chart, we can see that Rogbo, we should be at 3,000 feet. So I can set 3,000 feet. My heading, all right, so what's the inbound heading? 266. So I will set 266. Here we go. Now the profile. Coming clean at that position, it's a bit too fast, so let's go vectors with flaps 5, that's good. And now you can give the point whatever names you want. So for me, I will put Rogbo, and I will put here RNP 27 training. All right, now I just need to click on Save Waypoint, and as you can see, my waypoint has been created successfully. Now, if you want to fly that waypoint anytime, you just have to make sure you are in Bremen on runway 27. If you go to select fix, select waypoint, your waypoint will be right there. So you can just click on it, click validate, and now you can see on the summary that you will be at your waypoint called Workbow at 3,000 feet. So let's do that. Click move aircraft and the aircraft will go in the air. So here, as always, do not touch anything, just watch the show. You can answer the last lady that's asking you to leave, control airspace, okay, so we will do that so she's happy. And now, as FSiPanel is doing the work, do not touch anything. You will have plenty of times once in position freeze to set everything as required for this approach. So we just have to wait, and you will see that it's very easy to fly a RNP approach using FSiPanel. Okay, so we are approaching 3,000 feet. The speed looks good, so we should get the control anytime soon. And then we will program everything together to do this RNAV approach, RNP approach. All right, alto quiet, speed good. Now I'm expecting FSiPanel to give me the control, and that's the case. As you can see, aircraft ready, hold your brake for 3 seconds. From now on, when you get that message, you can do whatever you want in your cockpit. All right, first thing we want to do, we want to get rid of the ILS indication. As we are flying RNP approach, we don't want to have the ILS, because if we fly RNP, probably the ILS is off the air. All right, so now we don't have any ILS indication. Second thing we want to do is set up our FMC. So let me bring the RNP chart and let's have a look at the FMC. Departure arrival. We go to arrival, and now we are going to select the RNP approach. So let's see if we find it. RNAV 27, that's the one we want. We don't want any transition, so I will just go legs. If the routing is not activated, I just activate it. And as you can see now, Workbow is exactly 8 miles in front of us. This is what we wanted. This is what we program in FSiPanel. So now we'll just put it on top and execute. So now the lateral navigation of my FMC is done. The aircraft knows that you want to fly to Workbow, and then you will descend on this approach. Now the problem we have is that if I go progress page, you can see that we have a blank line here. We don't have top of descent. So basically the aircraft doesn't know when to descend. So this is because we have to give a reference, a cruising altitude reference to our FMC. So if you go to cruise page, you can see that we have the cruising altitude here on the first line. So make sure to match your actual cruising altitude. So we are at 3,000 feet. So I will set, 3,000 feet right there. Now that I have 3,000 and I execute, you can see that we have a top of descent shown on the map right there at Workbow, which is exactly what we want. So this is perfect. If you go to descent page and to prog page, we have now a top of descent. So that's what we want. We expect to descend in 8 miles, which is exactly at Workbow, and this is what we want if you check the chart. Okay, so this is done. Another thing we do normally, if you go to the position page and you go to page 3, in the nav status, you can see what the system is using. If I go to page 2 of the nav options, you can see that now my FMC is using the DME to update its position, the VOR to update the position, the GPS, and the localizer. So when we do an RNP approach, we want the only source to be used by the FMC, the GPS. So you just turn off those updates. So now my FMC will only get update from GPS. So usually if you fly RNP approach, maybe you have an issue with some VORs around, or you have an issue with the localizer. So if you put it off, everything except GPS, you guarantee that only GPS will be the source of your FMC. If, for example, you have a NOTAM that the VOR of Bremen is not working, then you could insert it right there. So you just need to have the identifier. So let's say Sierra Papa Romeo is not working. I could put it right there. And now the FMC, should I have the VOR update on, will not use Sierra Papa Romeo for its computation. That's what we do. Now if you go to progress page, page 4, you can see that by default the RNP approach RNP is 0.3 and we have a vertical RNP of 400 feet. This is the tolerance that you will see on your screen. Usually what we do is we force 0.3 as the RNP that we want, and this vertical RNP we will make it at 125 to make sure we have a nice approach. And you will see that once we have the MNP, NPS and the vertical deviation. Alright, so now we have set our FMC. I will make sure that I have my approach speed and I can set my minima. So the minima on that approach is 400 feet. So I will set 400 feet. Let's remove that so you can see that. Minimum 400 feet. And after that, we can go and fly that approach. All right, we have everything set up. Now we can fly the approach. One thing that you have to be careful now, if you have the VOR of Bremen. So if I put the VOR of the airport, let's have a look at what is the frequency for that. The VOR for Bremen is 11745. So if I set here 11745, now you're gonna have two DME during your approach. You're gonna have the DME from Bremen VOR right there, and you're gonna have the DME from Rockbo initially, but then it will show runway 27 right there. So if we look at our chart again, you can see that we need to check during descent or altitude versus distance, and the distance is based on the runway. So if you look at the distance from there, you're going to be completely wrong, and sometimes if you correct, you might be way too low. So be careful to check the distance from the runway right there. So I will show you that once we start flying the approach. All right. Everything is set up. Let's see if it works. I will hold the brake for 3 seconds. Here we go. And now I will arm LNAV. We have LNAV captured. I will arm VNAV. And we can expect now the aircraft to descend. Another thing that is nice to do is to put a circle of 2 miles from Rockbo. So I will do that here. Rockbo with 2 miles. And here we go. All right, let me bring that back here. And now we are good to go. One thing you should not forget, you should see VNAV path. If you don't have VNAV path, the aircraft will never descend. So be very careful to see VNAV path. Another thing is we need to give the autopilot the clearance to descend. So if you don't set a lower altitude in the window, in the altitude window, and you pass the top of descent, then this VNAV path will become VNAV alt, and then the aircraft will not descend. So now you have to mitigate, so probably lower the altitude, go vertical speed, catch your path, and then again engage VNAV again. So always be careful. This is why it's nice to have that little 2 miles circle. On top of that, you will get a FMC message. If you look at the FMC message, she's telling you, please reset MCP altitude. So sometimes new first officer, they quickly close any message, they clear it. And now what was the message? Well, I'm not sure. And now we forget to lower the altitude and we lose the approach. All right, so now that we are reaching that, we got the message. I will set my minima here, which is 400 feet. So now I know my aircraft will descend. When I set 400 feet and I have VNAV path, I know everything is good. Next thing to do, once we are 2 miles from top of descent, which is a nice hint as well, we'll go gear down flaps 15. So 2 miles, here we go, gear down. Once you go gear down, you can go ahead with your flow. Engine start switches to continuous, arm the speed brake, And now that the gear is down, I can go flaps 15. Now I will go back to manage speed. So speed intervene, blank the window, and the autopilot is reducing the speed to bug 15. Now on non-precision approach, it's always good to be fully stabilized at top of descent at initial final approach pitch, which is rock bow. So when you're around 0.5 miles, just go flaps 30. And now you can do your landing checklist whenever you're ready. So now what we're expecting, as we have VNAV path right there, is to see the vertical deviation right there, and the aircraft will start descent. VNAV path, and the aircraft start descent. And this is our tolerance. If you are getting out of tolerance, we will get a warning. Same thing for the lateral deviations right there. So now we know that we are in the right place. We can do our landing checklist. Engine start switches, they are continuous. The speed brake is armed. Landing gear is down. Flaps 30 green lights. Okay, so let's have a look about our altitude. What I was talking about. You can see, for example, that at 8 miles from the runway, we should be at 2620. So 8 miles from the runway, 2620. Okay, always check the distance from the runway right there and not the distance from there. You can see that there is a big difference, 9.1 versus 7.5. And once your altitude is 300 feet or less from missed approach altitude, on the chart it's 3000, then you can set your missed approach altitude. So we will set 3000 feet right there. Once you set the altitude, always cross-check. Make sure you are still in VNAV path. Sometimes you can revert. Why 300 feet? Because that's the tolerance for the autopilot. 200 feet or less, the autopilot will capture the altitude. If you are more than 200 feet deviation, then it will not capture the altitude. All right, so now we are all good. We can check another step at 6 miles. We should be 1990, so that looks good. Let's check the next one at 5 at 1660. So 5 miles, 1660. Again, from there, we can see that we are a little bit low. If you want to know how low you are, you can see the number is shown here. So now we are perfectly back on the track and on the path. So perfect. Let's see 5 miles, 1660. Perfect. As you can see, we are good. So we can continue our approach. So I will remove the chart and we will do the landing. So this is how to prepare and fly RNP approach using FSiPanel. As you can see, not a big deal. And the trap is always to set your cruise altitude in the FMC cruise page. Otherwise, she doesn't know what you want to do. And then she flies perfectly well. With RNP approach, if the last point is your runway, as right there, you can leave your flight director all the way until landing. You are guided all the way until you are on the runway. So that's a good thing to do, to know and to do. So keep your flight director and you can fly the approach all the way down to landing. And we don't need to worry about the flight director. If you fly non-precision approach like VOR, it is recommended when you take over the control and you disconnect the autopilot to recycle flight director. So turn off flight director 1, turn off first officer flight director and turn them back on. You won't have a display right there, but the flight director will be armed should you go around later on. All right, so we are getting close to our minima, which is 400 feet. Everything looks good. I will disconnect the auto throttle. Now I have manual thrust and I will disconnect around 500 feet my autopilot and complete a manual landing over there. I can see the PAPI looks good. We are 2 and 2, so VNAV is doing a perfect job. Approaching minimum, check, continue. Minimum, continue, landing, autopilot comes off. Now we try to maintain the descent rates and to maintain the PAPI. I don't need anymore to look on my vertical deviation. I'm flying now visually on the PAPI, slightly correcting the center line. Okay, speed brake up, Reversers, normal. I'm still using auto brake here. I will hit the brake myself now, and you will see auto brake disarm. And by 60 knots, I will stop the reverser. 60 knots out of reversers. Now we are 60 knots or below, which is a safe speed to vacate the runway. If you have high speed taxiway, that's good. Otherwise, make sure you reduce your speed at minimum, at less than 30 knots to vacate the runway. Right, guys, I hope you liked that video. If you have any question or comment, please drop it below and stay safe. And if you didn't subscribe to the channel, please do so. That will help me a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you next time.